that the way that our bodies move and the way that we stand and the facial expressions and so on reveal a lot about our thoughts and feelings, and often reveal that what we think might be a little bit different from what we're saying. You get body language experts who read the body language of other people to reveal what they're really saying. Sometimes it's a little bit more complicated than that. I was recently fascinated by a TED talk by a psychologist called Amy Cuddy, on the subject really of how we embody a lot of our feelings about ourselves, way more than what body language really covers. Amy Cuddy is the author of a remarkable book called Presence. And how she defines it, she says, presence stems from believing in and trusting in yourself, your real honest feelings, values, and abilities. That's important, she says, because if you don't trust yourself, how can others trust you? Whether we're talking in front of 2 people or 5,000 people, interviewing for a job, negotiating for a raise, or pitching a business idea to potential investors, speaking up for ourselves, speaking up for someone else. We all face daunting moments that must be met with poise if we want to feel good about ourselves and make progress in our lives. Presence gives us the power to rise to these moments. So presence is about really being attuned to your own feelings and your own thoughts and expressing them, expressing your values and your potentials through that presence. So it's a lot more than body language. Amy Cuddy talks about the physicality and how the body expresses way more than perhaps we are even conscious of. Even when you look at the cover of the book, that image, in this case of an artist's model puppet with the hands raised like that, that refers to something that Cuddy talks about, where she says, you know how when like an athlete wins a race, they instinctively raise their hands in that V shape. She points out that even people who have been blind since birth will do that. They haven't seen other people do that. It seems to arise from within ourselves. Cuddy says there's so many physical things that are non-conscious that express our true selves at a level more than we usually associate with body language. So what I want to talk about is some of what she says in this book and some of the advice she gives as to how to really master your own thoughts and feelings, to express them through presence. And she, in the process, deepens a lot of what we understand about expressing ourselves this way. Presence can be equated with a kind of power. Very often we are powerless or we feel powerless, but the opposite of powerlessness, she suggests, is not power, it's presence. And presence is not a permanent state. It's not a permanent state of I'm powerful, I'm in my body, I'm in a state of bliss. Rather, it's a moment-to-moment experience in which, she says, we are no longer fighting ourselves, we are being ourselves. And of course, the trick is learning to do that more and more of the time, to experience more of those moments when we being ourselves as much as possible. And that's what she's trying to focus on with the ideas that she puts forward in this book. Of course, it must be pointed out that that idea of it's a moment by moment process, not a permanent state, is very important in terms of many of the things that we pursue in order to achieve some kind of self-mastery. When we get into a state where we believe I've conquered it, I'm there now, finally been there, done that, learned those lessons, I'm all right, Jack, we are of course fooling ourselves. Not because that's impossible, but because life is a moment by moment experience, something we've commented on and discussed in earlier episodes of this show at various times when talking about various different ideas about how to improve ourselves. If we learn a kind of self mastery on a moment by moment basis, the more we do that, the more of our moments it occupies, the more we achieve that process. It's something I think about in terms of lessons of life anyway. We often think, I've learned that lesson, finally, I've put it behind me. I hear so many people say that. Why am I in another bad relationship? I thought I really learnt about this stuff in the last one, or any other experience that seems to repeat itself in a challenging way. And what I like to think about that is, because we need to be in a moment by moment state, if we believe that we've put something behind us, well, as my mother says, we don't have eyes in the back of our heads, and so it can jump on us. But if we put it into the present, in the moment with us, then it's a lesson I'm always learning. I have to be conscious of it. I think of it as it's something I'm on top of, as if I'm standing on it. So that if it stirs, if it starts rearing its ugly head, I will immediately be aware because I'm standing on it. And then I can bring myself back into the moment, back into a state of presence in order to try and deal with that. Cuddy does address the issue of self-affirmation, which has become a popular way of perhaps emulating that presence or emulating that present moment, I'm all right, Jack. But she calls it very cheesy, and I've always found it very cheesy itself. I'm good enough. I'm smart enough. People like me are some of the examples that she gives. And they're great ideas, make no mistake. But she said that kind of self-affirmation that is so popular, especially nowadays, in the realm of memes and quotes and passing that information around. While it is good to believe that or think that about yourself, it's really nothing that achieves that state of presence. She says that kind of self-affirmation is not what she means. And it doesn't have, presence doesn't have anything to do with that. Rather, she says, it's about reminding ourselves what matters most to us, and by extension, who we are. And in effect, it's a way of grounding ourselves in the truth of our own stories. She goes on to say, it makes us feel less dependent on the approval of others and more comfortable even with their disapproval if that's what we get. So it's a more grounded way of being, in that whatever it is that you're affirming in the self-affirmation, which, as we know, affirmations have the potential to be a whole bunch of hot air and not much else. So the real idea is some way of grounding it in our bodies, because presence, remember, is essentially a bodily state. So we're moving the idea of self-affirmation as just something I'm saying, just something that's going around in my head, just something I might even be thinking, believing, but having to kind of convince myself all the time. We all know it. We've all been there. It's not that it doesn't work. It's just that it seems to require a lot of effort and sometimes a little bit of self-fooling ourselves in order to really achieve that. Whereas Cuddy's approach is that it has to be embodied. And so it must arise from us rather than being something we repeating all the time. And that's why she says it's about reminding ourselves what matters most to us and the truth of our own stories. And so it's arising from us rather than being something that we're just reciting like a simple belief. As we heard, presence is related to power, as Cuddy suggests. It's a better alternative, opposite to powerlessness, presence versus powerlessness. But of course, it's the essential component of presence. And what she's really trying to do is give us that greater sense of our personal power through what she reveals, largely through research, which is also what's particularly interesting about what she talks about. And so a powerful moment or a powerless moment strongly affects how we behave immediately subsequent to that moment. So she shows research, for example, where people are assigned things like you're in charge, you're the boss, you're the employee, and how that immediately affects people's behavior in the tasks they're given after that. Or even flashing words at people. So some words associated with power, control, authority, powerlessness, obey, yield, and then in subsequent behaviors, how people's behavior changes. She's pointing out that we are primed into a state of powerlessness or power, but of course more often into the state of powerlessness. And when we're primed into the state of powerlessness, by whatever's going on, we underperform compared with those who are primed into a state of power in every way. She shows how different kinds of tests of behaviors and outcomes are significantly related to how we are primed by other people or circumstances into a state of power or powerless. So a lot of how we can change that is by priming ourselves, by kind of what she calls self-nudges, where we nudge both our mind and our bodies into a state of power. So pushing it past the idea of affirmation, because nudging ourselves is not a case of simply repeating the mantra of I'm good, I'm strong, I'm powerful, but to embody that power so that it expresses itself through our stories, our more importantly, our behaviors. So we need to prime ourselves into a state of power. Otherwise, others are priming us. How does the nudging work? Rather than repeating those affirmations, she says, firstly, focus on your own values to create more power, and recall your greatest moments if you want more of them. So it sounds too simple to be true, but the point is that it starts from you rather than something you're just plugging in. I'm okay, I'm strong, I'm fine. Rather, recall your own strengths. In each challenging situation, she says, we nudge ourselves, we encourage ourselves to feel a little more courageous, to act a little bit more boldly, to step outside of the walls of our own fear, anxiety, and powerlessness, to be a bit more present. And incrementally, over time, we end up where we want to be, even if we couldn't have said where that was when we started. Which is a powerful thought, because once you realize, I don't really need to say where I want to be, I'm strong, I can do this, etc. Rather just draw on where you've been and let that inspire you to act more boldly. It's not just based on affirmation, it's based on, I did this before, I know that I can do this, so let me push myself a little bit in this situation, let me act with the strength I felt then, because I know it's a real thing in me. And so eventually we end up in a more powerful situation just by doing that on a moment-by-moment basis. On the subject of that idea of the athlete throwing their arms up into the air when they win the race, regardless of whether they know about that or they've seen anyone do that, she says that, the psychologist William James said that our emotions are as much a result of our physical expressions as a cause of them. It's what she calls bidirectional. So then she poses the question, what would happen if we adopt expansive postures even when we're feeling powerless? Do this even when you didn't feel the race. Does it start feeling like you did win the race? since we naturally expand our bodies when we feel powerful, do we also naturally feel powerful when we expand our bodies? She asks. So that is the bidirectional idea. When you feel powerful, you expand, and when you expand, you feel powerful. So simply holding your body in a more expansive, powerful way actually makes you feel more powerful. And of course, that is known with body language, that adopting the stance of someone who's more powerful makes you feel more powerful and makes other people respond to you as if you're more powerful. She quotes a study in which people were split into two groups. One group assumed kind of low power poses where they reduced the space they took. They slouched. They kept their hands close to their body, their legs close to together, head down, so reducing the space. And the other group took on expanded positions where they sit in a relaxed, confident way, legs out, hands behind their head, hands on their hips, chin up, the classical powerful pose. And it only took 2 minutes to get to what she says. In our sample of women and men, the high power poses showed a 19% increase in testosterone and a 25% decrease in cortisol. This is known as the dual hormone hypothesis. High testosterone and low cortisol makes high power. Low testosterone and high cortisol makes low power. She says low power poses showed the opposite pattern, a 10% decrease in testosterone and a 17% increase in cortisol in both men and women. It only took 2 minutes to shift the hormone balance to high power or low power from adopting a high power pose or a low power pose. That is literally scientific evidence of the bidirectional nature of presence in the body, emotions in the body, leading to the actual state that we seek. In another very revealing experiment, she has people put into a situation which is uncomfortable and in which they have to interact using a device. And some of them are on a desktop computer and some of them are on a cell phone. And she says 50% of the smartphone users eventually find the experimenter to say they're not comfortable doing this. 94% of the desktop users did that. They went and asserted themselves, essentially. And as she says it, the people using the big computer were more likely to interrupt the experimenter and say this isn't cool with me, and more likely to do it smaller, whereas people using a device were less likely to do that. And she concludes that the smaller the device, the smaller we must contract our bodies to use it. And the more time we spend in these shrunken inward postures, the more powerless we feel, as she proved with her measurement of the hormone balance. And that's really interesting because we spend so much time on the phone and we think that we're being more constructive by carrying our business around on the phone, but by doing this we put ourselves into a powerless situation. So we become more powerless the more we use our phone for business time or anything else, rather than more powerful because we think, oh no, I'm able to work wherever I am. So it's just an interesting idea at so many levels, the extent to which working with a small device or put it with something that makes ourselves shrink down like this makes us more powerless. Similarly, when we're anxious, we become more vigilant, we become hyper alert, our hearts race, we might break out into a sweat, our cortisol level goes up, which means feeling powerless. All those reactions are automatic reactions. The nervous system does it, and it's pretty much impossible for us to control that or to shut it down. So we can't. And interestingly, if someone says, calm down, it usually increases the cortisol level and makes us even more anxious, because when someone tells us to calm down, it's another way of saying to us, you're not calm. And when we get told that, we get a little bit more anxious, and the cortisol goes up, and we have the exact opposite effect of what we're trying to achieve. We all know that situation of being told to calm down has the opposite effect. We don't need our cortisol measured to know that. Most of us scream back, don't tell me to calm down. And of course, it's very evident that we're less calm than we were before. But you know, there is a way to kind of bring out the opposite. So similarly to anxiety and stress raising these levels of arousal, so does excitement. So although we can't remove the kind of heightened arousal that comes from a negative state, we can interpret it differently, kind of replace it with a different state. So rather than pointlessly trying to change the arousal level, can't calm down, so we can't change the arousal level, we can shift from negative to positive. We can't make our emotional state lower, but we can perhaps shift from anxiety to excitement. So the idea is that when you feel yourself getting stressed out, instead of saying, calm down, calm down, calm down, say to yourself, I'm excited, I'm getting more excited, I'm excited. Cuddy says, don't try and change your arousal state from very high to very low. Rather change your experience of that arousal from negative, oh no, something's wrong, to positive. Yes, my body is giving me all the resources I need to crush it. I'm excited. Let's do this. It's not about an affirmation, remember. It isn't, oh, I'm excited, I can do this. It's responding to the body. It's arising from us. It's responding to the arousal states of the body, which usually leads to anxiety, and saying, my body is giving me the resources I need. That's why I'm aroused. And that means I'm excited. We can do this. And Cuddy says we fake it until we become it, not as a manipulation over others, but to trick ourselves so that we can gain personal power to express our best, our boldest, our most authentic version of ourselves. And that can be done in any situation, not just some event or something that just happened. So she says, bring that bold version of yourself into your life today by the moment experience of responding to your body and shifting it into a powerful version, of learning to adjust your posture, of learning to respond to the arousal state of your body by interpreting it as excitement and realizing I have what I need. And by taking these responsibility and by making these little nudges to ourselves all the time, we can become powerful. Maya Angelou, the great American poet, said, stand up straight and realize who you are, that you tower over circumstances. Because in the end, it's true, anything comes from us. And the way to do that is not by just telling ourselves, but by being ourselves, being the boldest version of ourselves, drawing on knowledge and experience and memory of the boldest version of ourselves. And as we do those little nudges, without having to say, I will do this, without having to know what the outcome is, but by drawing on that and expanding ourselves and standing up and sometimes putting down that phone just because you want to expand your posture and raise your head so that you're not looking down at the phone the whole time. That will shift your experience of yourself and of your life. It will give you presence, and presence is what true power is. I'll be back next week at the usual time. Don't forget, you can catch up on past episodes and revisit favorite ones on my YouTube channel. Just search for my name and you'll find it there. See you next week.